With this video, I really wanted to shine a light on the two conversations that are going on here. You have the conversation of economic impact, and then you have the conversation of love, which in this perspective is romanticism. So you have love, which in the New Age community, which is largely connected to this new world, one people movement, that we're all one and we're all human. What that does largely is invalidates a lot of the psychological and physical warfare and spiritual warfare that has been going on for centuries against a particular people, in favor of another kind of people. The benefit of invalidating that perspective and hiding it under the flowery lights of love and romanticism is that you set the foundation of romanticizing this new world government through this one world of people. Blending all of the races into this blanket of humanity is a psychological warfare designed to wash over all of everything that has happened through colonialism and racism overall. The expansion of the system of racism, white supremacy. Now, when I mention racism, white supremacy, I'm not limiting everything that's going on to racism, white supremacy. We're talking about power. When you're talking about love and economic impact and marriage and all this other stuff, largely people are talking about power, but that is not where the conversation is coming from. You have a lot of people who are locked into their emotions when they're talking about love. And when you're talking about love, that's on the same kind of par as talking about race. Race and love are the same vibration when you're talking about in comparison to power. Power encompasses love, both love and race. But when you have a lot of people who haven't done the research on how deep this manipulating of people has gone over centuries, you get people who are comfortable with just talking about love and race because they don't have the background of information. They don't know about the intelligence behind the protecting of genetic annihilation. They don't have the intelligence behind why racism is such a big weapon that is used overall. They can't really empathize with or even sympathize with what is going on because largely they're just unaware of the events and the depths of the warfare overall. Keeping people in those shallow depths of those perspectives is the same reason why you have people like Alex Jones and the midstream media, as I call it, that are pushed out there to keep people, same with the QBs and all this other stuff. You're only at best halfway informed on what's going on because the largest percentage of people are going to get locked into just being controlled by the mainstream media. But a smaller percentage of people are going to question that, know about that. You think they're not going to have a contingency plan for that? They're going to have people lined up, leaders lined up, perspectives lined up that are designed to keep people from going any further than the next level of mind control. This is what the midstream media is. Alex Jones, all of your RT, TYT is another version, like the difference between TYT and Fox News. So that's just like one basic version, basic interpretation of what's going on. But then you have, beyond that, you have entire communities. You have the Black conscious community, you have flat earth communities, you have the New Age community, you have LGBT communities. A better example of this overall is like how Black Lives Matter is coming under fire now, when people in other communities were breaking this down. Like on my channel, we're breaking down how Black Lives Matter has been controlled and set out there to be this midstream perspective consciousness from the get-go. But now that people are starting to see the money, after all the money poured in, now that people are following the money, they're starting to see what we had already been breaking down years ago. So what this does is this buys time, and when you buy time, you're buying power. The intention is to maintain shallow relationships, because when you maintain shallow relationships, you maintain shallow people, And you'll have those shallow people have a shallow approach to revolt, have a shallow approach to empowering themselves. When you have this loose and watered down version of who and what people are, culturally, tribally, so on and so forth, they're not going to be able to empower themselves because they have no foundation. They have nowhere to plant their roots. So the roots, the soil that they can plant their roots has been genetically modified. It's mainstream soil that the system wants people to plant their roots. This new age version of who and what people are through the perspective of we're all one, it's just humanity. This is a very loose and nutrient dead perspective. It's empty. There's nothing there. Part of the new age perspective, part of the new age intention out there is to invalidate perspectives that address situations like systematic racism. What that does is that creates division, and it creates a lack of understanding, and overstanding of how deep these programs are going. When you have these new age teachers that are out there speaking only about consciousness and meditation and consciously avoiding the perspective, the deep perspectives, the questions of why things are the way they are in relation to systematic racism, colonialism, and the system of racism, white supremacy. When you have those teachers, these so-called higher thinkers, invalidating that information by ignoring that information, what they are also doing, it's a subtle form of gaslighting the people, because you have people who know how very important this information is, who are now thinking to themselves, like, is something wrong with me because I think this is very important? I feel like this is very important to me. Like, this is involved in consciousness, the question of consciousness. This is involved racism and the depths of why racism is, and interracial relationships and all this other stuff. These very important topics to me are not spoken of by these higher, vibrating conscious individuals like Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and so on and so forth. And if they do address this information, they address it on a very shallow layer, and largely it's deflection. They go back to whatever their mode is. They go back to meditation, or they go back to oneness, or they go to another example of that is like when I talk about whatever their mode is, like Obama was selling hope when he was campaigning to be president, and then he became the president, and you still had this hope for 8 years and nothing happened. So that just kills your entire movement. What happens when he leaves that office? Well, you had this hope. Now you still have this hope because he's still a leader, but now your hope is still dead because this so-called leader is now silent, largely. When some of the biggest race issues that are going on, your first black president is largely mute on this situation, on many of the situations, and his campaign was based on hope. His silence is designed to kill that hope. So when you have people who avoid this information, you have people who are avoiding depths of themselves. So they have a lack of empathy with themselves, with their own storyline. So when you have shallow and weak-minded people, you create shallow and weak-minded relationships. Shallow and weak-minded relationships are going to add to shallow and weak-minded movements, revolutions, and pretty much nothingness. And that goes back into the power. Beyond the economic power, you have psychologically powerless individuals, physically powerless individuals when they're eating up all these destructive foods. Spiritually powerless people when they're eating up all this destructive religious food. In relation to the relationships, the love, and then the economics perspectives, those two different perspectives, economics comes after the healing process. Before economics, you have to first talk about the institution of marriage. Before the institution of marriage conversation comes along, you have to talk about the institution of love and self-love. This is where the empathy question comes into, the empathy conversation comes back into the forefront. And when you have individuals who not only can't even comprehend the experience that a lot of these individuals have gone through, they can't even empathize at all with it. You're going to have a shallow love relationship. When you have a shallow relationship with lacking empathy, then you're going to create future generations of individuals who are going to have a shallow perspective at the same time. So those relationships, those shallow relationships, are why interracial relationships are pushed so hard in the mainstream media and pushed so hard in the New Age community. This is where I see the conversation gets kind of mixed up, is because you have people talking from two different perspectives. Once we get these perspectives hashed out and realize that first we have to address individuals strictly talking about black economics, and then you have to talk about individuals strictly talking about love. If you're going to talk about love, address romanticism, address desire in that perspective. If you're going to talk about economics, address the institution of marriage, and then address the institution of love, and then romanticism. And then once you get that conversation coming together, then you'll understand even more why this conversation usually doesn't go anywhere. What we're realizing with these perspectives that are pushed by the New Age community is that this is another form of psychological abuse. Like I said, there's a subtle form of gaslighting that's going on with these New Age teachers who consciously avoid systematic racism. When if they do, they just talk about it on some kind of shallow layer, and then just divert it back to meditation or whatever kind of prescription drug they're trying to sell to people. That gaslighting is psychological abuse. That lack of empathy adds to a deeper form of psychological warfare. When you look at a lot of these New Age teachers, you're going to realize they're trying to sell you something. Be very aware of these individuals who are trying to sell you something, because largely some of them are doing it because they want to distract you from empowering yourselves. Because if you empower yourselves, you're not going to need to follow anybody, and you're not going to need to buy anything that these individuals are selling.